And the president, just one of many speakers this week. Each night, there's expected to be a whole host ranging from key party players to other members of the Republican Party.
That's right. There will be a lot to take each night from a lot of people talking each night from the convention. Joining us live with a look at each night is Ben Gaskins, an associate professor of political science at Lewis and Clark College. Thanks so much for joining us, Ben. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. So, we all watched the Democratic National Convention last week. What are going to be, some of the key differences between the DNC and the RNC?
Well, I think you'll see a lot. This is definitely a very Trumpy convention. So the parties are really approaching this in a very different way, where the DNC was really about trying to build a broad coalition, bringing in a lot of Republicans to very prominent speaking roles to help, Joe Biden really reach out to not only his left wing, but also to the middle and to moderate Republican voters. This week, it doesn't really seem like the RNC is doing quite the same thing, that Trump is putting a lot of his family and close allies on the speaking list, and you don't see a lot of Democrats crossing over to support him. And so I think it's going to have a very different feel and a different focus, but one that really does match what the president wants to achieve.
Let's talk a little bit about precedent. You mentioned this would be kind of a Trumpy convention. The president's going to be making an appearance all 4 days of this convention and then giving his acceptance speech from the White House. Have we seen that before? How unusual is that in terms of a convention?
Well, I think both of those elements are pretty unique. Of course, we are in very unique times, and with the pandemic, nothing is particularly normal about this. But I think there's a little bit of stagecraft of waiting until the final night for the president to come out and give their remarks. But it seems that, again, President Trump really wants to be front and center of all 4 nights, and so he is getting his wish on that. And by speaking from the White House, that does add a little bit to the gravitas of the moment. And again, it's something that there's been a longstanding effort to somewhat separate the political from the government. And that distinction, I think, throughout Trump's term has been diminished somewhat. And I think this is another example of that.
Yeah, historically, what kind of an impact have conventions had on the various presidential elections we've seen throughout the years? I mean, do they make an impact as far as who goes on to win?
Sometimes you will see a pretty dramatic impact. Everyone has been talking about the 1988 convention, where Michael Dukakis got a huge bump and led George H.W. Bush for a while after the Democratic National Convention. But in more recent years, the convention bumps have been much more muted, where because of polarization and the fact that many of the candidates have been more widely known, the bumps have been much smaller. And the polling coming out of last week shows that Joe Biden really didn't get much of a bump. If anything, got some more enthusiasm for his side and more Democrats saying they're voting for him rather than just against Donald Trump. But when, for Joe Biden's purposes, he's already up a substantial amount, so he doesn't need as much of a bump. This week, I think the president really does need to try to have some positive news and a significant bump, though, again, it's unlikely to see a significant one.
Well, speaking of positive news, that's one thing we've heard the president and other members of the Republican Party talk about leading up to this convention. They say they want this to be a positive spin on things. And I think one of the challenges here is the fact that we're seeing this economic hardship, the coronavirus pandemic, all of that's happening under his presidency. So how does he come into the RNC here and sell people on things getting better under his second term?
That's the most important question. I think that President Trump really thrives as an outsider, projecting a message of disrupting normal in the status quo, which you can do when you're running against Hillary Clinton and maybe to some degree Joe Biden. But as you mentioned, he's been president now for almost 4 years. And so he is, in many ways, the status quo. And I think the fact that the president's instincts are to really go after his opponents and those that attack him mean that it's going to be hard to really maintain a consistent narrative built on the accomplishments of the past few years and building towards the next term. I think a lot of his instincts will be to go after the Democrats and Joe Biden in particular.
Yeah, well, it should be interesting to watch for sure. Thank you, Ben, for your insight. Always good to hear what you have to say about these matters. And of course, people can watch the 2020 Republican National Convention on our sister station, KOIN 6. CBS is offering primetime broadcasts of the RNC starting tonight, followed by our KOIN 6 News at 10. And we will have full coverage of the RNC through Thursday night.